amendment proposed. Clause 1, page 1, line 5, leave out born on or after the 1st of January 2009 and insert under the age of 21. The question is that this amendment be agreed to.
Lords, I rise to speak to my amendments number 5 and 205 in this group, which are in fact, although there's been no prior discussion between myself and my noble friend Lord Murray of Blidworth, are in fact pointing in a very similar direction. What I'm proposing here is in Amendment 5 that the age of the permitted age of sale be raised in the interim to 21. Amendment 205 is purely consequential, so I don't intend to say anything about that separately. I'll focus on Amendment 5. So that there would be an immediate introduction on the passing of the bill of a ban on sales to persons under the age of 21, with a view really to replacing the generational ban. And the arguments against the generational ban that have been made by my noble friend are extremely compelling and comprehensive. So there is not a great deal that I can add, but I can bring, which perhaps my noble friend I think doesn't have, some experience of having had political responsibility in the past for the enforcement of underage tobacco sales in a local authority through a trading standards department, and having been, of course, myself out in disguise in a fairly clandestine way, because that's how they operate, on such excursions. I won't call them raids, because that makes them sound very dramatic. I should just say excursions in order to test sales at various premises to see if they're complying with the law. So I do have some experience of that. I think in the minds of those promoting the generational ban, there's a sort of expectation that it is going to be self-enforcing. After all, when one looks at the ban on smoking in offices and in shops, which was introduced some years ago, it is self-enforcing. I've never seen anybody attempt to enforce it. There hasn't been any necessity. When was the last time one saw somebody smoking in a shop so that enforcement might be required, or wandering around their office with a cigarette or a pipe? It is self-enforcing, and there seems to be a suggestion or a thought that this ban too will be self-enforcing. But all the evidence, it seems to me, points the other way. What we have, the first line of enforcement that we have, is, of course, the retailer. Now, we know the retailer, as my noble friend said, suffers considerably from aggression and indeed from violence in trying to enforce the existing ban on sales. And that is only likely to become worse when they're asked to make finely judged distinctions as between somebody who might be 38 and somebody who might be 39. And how does one make that sort of judgment? But that's what's required. The thought is maybe that the person who's 38 will say willingly, I am no longer able to buy cigarettes, even though my friend here, who happens to be a year older, can do so. And I just don't believe that is remotely credible. And I think the first force of this is going to fall on the retailer. Then there is the question of the trading standards officers. My lords, the trading standards function in most local authorities is considerably less even than it was in my day, which was some years ago. There is very little trading standards activity in local authorities. And so the idea that the trading standards are going to be able to enforce this in practice is mildly delusional, and yet a very extensive regime of enforcement and supervision is going to be required if the generational ban is to be made effective. And finally, my noble friend mentioned crime. I don't know that we take this sufficiently seriously. We're not talking simply about crime. we're talking about the utter degradation of many of our high streets. I've been shocked by the coverage of the BBC in the last few months of the investigations they've undertaken of illegal cigarette sales in shops on high streets. And I don't witness this myself where I live, to be perfectly frank, but in many of the towns outside London, it is absolutely the case that high streets have been taken over by a series of illegal businesses purportedly selling vegetables and the occasional packet of cornflakes, but actually engaged in the systematic sale of illegal cigarettes. And as my noble friend said, this, of course, can easily connect to drug crime. I don't want to sound over-dramatic, but anyone who follows Politico, which is a sort of news agency, and gets their alerts, might have seen this morning that there's a report of a judge in Belgium, an Antwerp judge, with anonymously written a letter saying that Belgium is basically a narco state. That is how he has referred to it. The importation of narcotics through Antwerp is now so extensive, it is accompanied by high levels of violence, 60 shootings alone in Brussels in the course of this year, drug-related shootings, and by corruption. Judges are offered bribes. There is a systematic business, mafia-like business, being conducted in a state just across the water. This is not some remote third world state. This is a state just across the water from us, which is very like us in many ways. Of course, that could never happen here. Well, my lords, it is already happening, and we already have lost control of our southern border to a highly organized business, a mafia, which is engaged in people trafficking. And that mafia is not just operating overseas, it has a large operation in the United Kingdom, which itself is not disconnected to what is happening in our high streets with illegal cigarettes. And there is a real threat to us in what is happening at the moment. And we need to be realistic about it. Feeding the flames of that by an unenforceable generational ban is simply lunacy. It is just as happened with prohibition in the United States. That is what gives the mafia life, and we are encouraging that by introducing this ban. What I am proposing, and what my noble friend proposes, is a ban on sales below the age of 21, and as he has said, this would not only be enforceable on the existing model, because it is merely an adjustment to the existing arrangement. It is not only enforceable on the existing model, but it would appear from the government's own facts and evidence to achieve a very similar result to what they are aiming at. I really beg the Minister to have some sense about the enormity of the consequences of what she might be embarking on if she pushes ahead with this bill, and to give very serious consideration to what my noble friend has argued, and which I am, in my rather less organised way, supporting.